This is the story of two Scottish soldiers who had lain undiscovered for more than 100 years. The story of the dedicated team who, against all the odds, managed to track down their families.
The scale is unimaginable in this day and age, I think. So as long as there are men out there that are still missing, we will still do this work and still try and find them.
There's a number of casualties that were discovered when they built the highway.
We're doing this not for medical legal reasons, but for commemorations, for remembrance, for memories, for families.
Families who can now lay them to rest and honour their part in a battle that cost thousands of lives.
I was speechless.
Oh my God, what's this? I was shaking when I read the letter.
It's estimated that 100,000 soldiers who fought and died in the First World War from 1914 to 1918 have no known grave. They're listed as missing, presumed dead. Their families never had the chance to discover their fate, to honour their lives and their part in the war against Germany. Most are just names engraved on memorials. Their remains are scattered across France, buried under the passage of time. For some, their stories can be told again. Their names can be traced, their families informed, their bravery honoured. All thanks to the work of expert forensic teams and specialist researchers. The story starts here on a construction site in northern France. The soldiers' remains were uncovered by workers building a new hospital in the town of Lens in 2021.
They uncovered human remains associated with military artifacts, metal artifacts. And so they stopped, called the police. The police identified the site as military and Commonwealth and called us for the recovery.
The recovery team from the Commonwealth War Graves Commission was on the site within hours.
This is where we find during unexploded ordnances clearance projects a shell hole with 6 Commonwealth soldiers.
Just here?
Yeah, just around here. So this whole area was cleared for ammunition, underground ammunition. So the first thing we do when we arrive on site is look at the items and the remains that are found. Then look at the backfield, sift through it to find anything else that they might have missed. Because it's really hard, especially if you can imagine November, the rain, the mud, everything comes in clumps. So it's very easy to miss something.
On the other side of the construction site, more remains were found.
So about 120 plus casualties were found in this area, but most were found underneath what is the hospital, the Lens Hospital now.
And that was just farmland?
And this was repurposed farmland. It was farmland since the First World War. For France alone, there's 100,000 missing casualties for the First World War. And that's really the bulk of our targets because 95% of our recoveries are First World War. So we're looking at this pool of candidates. And again, realistically, a good number of these are physically destroyed, either by the war itself, Second World War, or any subsequent urban development that may have disturbed the graves in the cemeteries and the battlefields. So we're not sure how many are actually recoverable today.
In 1915, the war with Germany had reached stalemate. The Western Front stretched for 400 miles from the far north of France to its southern border. The Allied commanders wanted to break through the German lines. They chose the town of Loos, and the British would lead the assault.
And the retaliation in 1915 was the battle called Loos.
The attack was a disaster. Thousands of troops were killed, thousands more injured. At the end, even the Germans stopped firing, sickened by the slaughter. After 3 days of fighting, the battle lines had hardly moved. From the War Graves Commission HQ in France, the recovery team are on standby 24/7, promising to be on site within 2 hours. They average 40 to 50 call-outs every year.
And this is our lab.
This isn't open to the public, is it?
No, this is restricted area, and this is where we process the artifacts and the human remains that are discovered during our recoveries.
The Commission's rules mean they cannot show us the remains recovered, only the artifacts found alongside.
We can have a shell hole, which is the most usual context in which we find our human remains, and the casualties are just dropped, thrown in the hole. We find small pieces of casualties. We find partial casualties, so half a grave because the grave was shelled or a road went through it, or of course full military graves, whether they were made by their friends, so they're proper graves where the soldiers are properly laid out, or sometimes those graves can be made by the enemy. Uniform buttons are almost systematically found, shoulder titles, cap badges, and then webbing buckles, and of course any other personal items in metal that can be worn by the soldier.
The recovery unit spent years processing the finds from the hospital site. In most cases, it was not going to be possible to identify the soldiers. But eventually they began to focus on 2 sets of remains and artifacts. There was just enough that they might get a breakthrough. They might be able to say who they were.
We have a number of categories of items. We have military issued items, the boots, the uniform, the fabric. We have the first aid kits with the safety pins. We have buckles. We have general service buttons. We have underwear or shirt buttons. We have shoulder titles. We have also ammunitions with shrapnel balls and bullets. But until you move to more precise regimental button, then the list of missing in action can go from something around 20,000 missing in action, if I recall correctly, to down to a very small list of maybe a dozen potential candidates. And this is the key. Once we have a regimental kind of level, we go down to 4 potentially unique identifiers. So, of course, ID tag, regimental numbers, initials, anything that can be found that points to a single casualty.
So now the recovery team had the location, the units the soldiers had fought in, and some of their personal effects. But there was still a long way from identifying either of them. That would take the expertise of another specialist team based in the UK. Imgin Barracks in Gloucestershire is home to NATO's Rapid Reaction Force, on constant standby to respond to conflict in the 21st century. It's also home to the JCCC, the Joint Casualty and Compassionate Centre. Not many people have heard of them or the work they do from this nondescript office block, but the dedication and diligence of this small team has earned it the nickname the War Detectives.
We're sometimes known as the War Detectives, but we're tasked with identifying the missing soldiers from the British Army from the First World War, the Second World War, and sometimes the Korea conflict as well.
What we do does involve a lot of detective work. When remains are recovered and they're determined to be First World War British, we are tasked with trying to identify them.
So in the first instance, we'll receive an initial report from the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, which will describe what's been found, where, and under what circumstances. And that's always exciting because a new case is always going to be exciting. You don't know what your voyage of discovery is going to be. And you know, from that we can start to build a picture, start to drill down on details and start to figure out if it is possible to identify the person who's been found.
So we'll use trench maps, we'll use war diaries, but it depends what they were found with. If they were found with an artefact that gives us a regimental name, that helps us quite a lot because we can look at where that particular regiment, what they were doing at the time in that particular location.
For the 2 sets of remains, the team in France had recovered several significant artefacts. But amongst the regimental insignia, uniform buttons and boots, there was one unusual clue.
This casualty was found with some tiny little buttons from the Newcastle Corporation tramway, which obviously was quite unusual with a Scottish soldier. I wondered if I could use those buttons to try and make an identification. So what I ended up doing was going through the 1911 census to see if I could find any connection between a Scottish soldier and Newcastle.
The war detectives eventually narrowed it down to a soldier in the Cameron Highlanders. They then looked at how many Highlanders were still missing in action from the Battle of Loos. The list was getting smaller, small enough to look the missing men up one by one on the 1911 census, and then look for a connection. And they found one. Now they had a name.
The census here has Gordon McPherson, and it has him working as a tobacconist assistant. But the key information was it's got James, his father, and his James was working as a storekeeper for the Newcastle Corporation Tramway.
Gordon McPherson, a lance corporal in the 7th Battalion of the Cameron Highlanders, killed in action on the first day of the battle. He was 23 years old. The team still had another case to solve. Initially, there was not much to go on, and these remains were discovered along with 5 other soldiers, making identification even more difficult. But the team in France had discovered that one of them could be an officer.
There was a couple of regimental artefacts, and there was something that signified that there was potentially an officer within the group. There was nothing really clearer than that. So obviously what I'm looking at is, again, a group of sort of hundreds and hundreds of names. What I decided to do was focus on the officers to see if I could identify who that person was. There were 14 officers missing from that particular day and that battle. So I traced the families of every single one of those 14 officers.
Now they thought they had another name, Lieutenant James Allen of the 9th Battalion, the Gordon Highlanders. He was also killed on the first day of the Battle of Loos. He was 20 years old. So all the evidence was pointing to the 2 soldiers, Gordon McPherson and Jim Allen. But they had to be 100% sure. The only way to do that was to carry out a DNA test. But that meant tracking down living relatives.
When I've got the name of someone who I think is probably alive, I will then start things like Googling them. You know, is there any news articles about them? Do they have a LinkedIn? Can I find them on Facebook? And it's through that, you know, I'm able to eventually trace them.
In a surprising twist to the story, the family of James Allen was already known to the team.
I get to the point where I think I've found one of the great nephews, and his address is just down the road from here. And my colleague Alexia, I know that she lives in that area. So I said to Alexia, do you know this address?
I thought, well, they're literally my neighbour. They're 3 doors down. That's crazy. I mean, the coincidence that you've got 500,000 men missing, to find one of them or their descendants literally around the corner is, the odds must be astonishing.
The Allen family all hail from Scotland, but were brought up in Stroud, where oldest brother Nicholas has run a cafe for more than 20 years. They're a close family, proud of their history and heritage. They grew up knowing all about the part one of their relatives played in the Great War.
This is James Grant Allen in his military kilt, aged 20, our Uncle Jim, as I call him, Great Uncle Jim. So this is one of the letters we have, the original, from Jim to his sister Margaret, written 6 weeks before he was killed. And it finishes, if I can read it, the handwriting. Don't imagine from this letter that I am unhappy, because I am not. It's just that the uselessness of the whole thing has been impressed on me in the last few days. Now, much love and good night, Jim. Wanted some matches.
You discovered a whole pile of letters of Grandad's, didn't you? And suddenly this whole history started coming alive. I've got a 17-year-old son, and to imagine him in a year's time going off to a battle of that sort is unbelievable.
He was also just a little boy. That's what my overriding feeling, that he was barely 20.
Big kid.
And suddenly he was in this situation, and I feel sad that he didn't live his life. He didn't live his life. He never married, if he had he wanted to, had children, did something.
Oldest brother Nicholas was one of several people from different families asked to take a DNA test by the war detectives. he was at work in the cafe as usual when the call came.
I remember it was a busy morning in the cafe. I was sat having my morning coffee. Here I am. And I called her. She said, "This is Nicholas Allen." And she said, "Oh, it's Nicola Nash here. I've got some news from you. The DNA sample that you got was a match. It was, the remains were of your great uncle, James Grant Allen." I was like, oh my God. It was just, it kind of stopped me in my track, because I'm busy like, oh, have you cleared table 3? I was in the busy, like in the everyday, and suddenly this kind of thing from out the blue came and just like, it's like, wow. This is 110 years ago. It was like, it just, the hairs on the back of my neck went up. I was like, oh my God, why is this happening? Why particular him and not 1,000 others?
I suppose the main response I had was excitement. Since then, reading all these letters, I've gone on quite a journey of living into that experience, of what it must have been like for them. To hear it written by hand by your great uncle to his sister saying, "Don't imagine I'm unhappy, but this is just crazy. This is, I can't understand why this is happening." Describing in detail where it's dangerous and where not, and what it's like.
300 miles to the north, and the war detectives had another breakthrough, another positive DNA match, this time for Gordon McPherson.
This is Gordon and Cameron Highlanders in the First World War.
Since they were boys, brothers Alistair and Andrew McPherson have been fascinated by the black box, a family heirloom handed down through the generations.
This is what's known in the family as the black box. From being as young as I can recall, we've always been aware of it, and the family treasure, I guess.
Inside, personal items, medals, photographs and letters. One was from Gordon's fellow soldiers, sent back to the McPherson family after he'd been killed in action, to let them know how much he had meant to them.
This is from number 12914, Machine Gun Section, 7th Camerons. His favourite song, Trumpeter, What Are You Sounding Now, grew to be the most popular within the section. Alas, how significant are the words now, when my trumpet sounds no longer. It is quite a common thing to hear one of the boys unconsciously start the song and then suddenly stop. It was Gordon's song. We can't sing it now. Out of the blue, post arrived, brown envelope, you think, oh, it's the tax man. And you pick it up and it's like Ministry of Defence. Like, what the hell are they writing to me about? So we open the letter, and then in the title, it's Lance Corporal Gordon McPherson. I went, oh my God, what's this? And I rang the number on the letter and spoke to Nicola, and she told me about the discovery, the reason they thought it was Gordon, because his remains had been found with 2 buttons from the Newcastle Tramways Company. And my great-grandfather was the Chief Inspector of Newcastle Tramways, so our assumption is that he'd given Gordon the buttons for luck. And it were lucky because it helped identify his remains, because I think there were a fair number of remains found. And then it was a case of speaking to Nicola and arranging a DNA test.
So this is the last correspondence we have from Gordon himself, which is dated 2 days before the battle on the 23rd of September. Literally, it's a card that he's allowed to cross lines out. So all that's left to say is, I'm quite well, I've received your letter, follow us at first opportunity. It's an incredible thing, really, if you think it'll be 110 years since. But it feels like it does feel like a close relative,
yeah.
You know. There were tears. I'm not, you know, I had a tear. My daughter, who'd always, you know, who studied history and had used Gordon's story in the past and what have you, there were tears there even, so that's, 3 generations down. Because he's always, the story of him has always been kind of really present in the family, you know, and it feels like an absolute miracle that he's been found, and it's a wonderful thing that he's been found. And there are photographs of him with his pals with a bottle of beer in his hand, you know, a 23-year-old lad with his pals before he's gone there. And so, you know, Yeah, it's very human. It's not just some dusty photograph in a uniform. We've got a lot more than that.
He was killed at the furthest extent of the Camerons' advance, and then the Germans counterattacked, so he basically ended up behind German lines and spent 110 years missing, killed in action. No known grave. And then the war detectives found him.
I think when you've named somebody, when you've come into contact with their family, and when you've been present through the closing chapters of their story, I suppose, they become part of your story as well. So I don't think I will ever forget any of the named men that I've been involved with the stories of.
Very rewarding job.
It really is. It's the best job in the world, actually. There's no two ways about it. It is the best job ever.
They become really special to us. They have a special place in our hearts. And when you're actually able to kind of understand their personality and really build a picture of who they were, you know, they become even more special to you. These two men, Macpherson and Allen, I feel a really special connection with them because of how much I know. And it's been, I feel like I've got a special connection with the families as well, because they've both been so involved and so brilliant.
They're closing down 100+ years history of their family, history. They're closing an episode from their family history, and it's always, I almost dare to say, joyous moments, because he's found, finally is going to be resting in a proper place, in a grave where everybody can visit. And when they're at the burial, with the flag, with the coffin, and the ceremony, they all cry, no matter what. And it really reopens, in a positive way, a chunk of their family history. So we're doing this not for medical legal reasons, but for commemorations, for remembrance, for memories, for families. And this is really the crux of our work.
Finally, the names can be engraved on headstones. Finally, 2 young soldiers of Scotland will be buried with full military honours. 4 years after their remains were uncovered, Gordon Macpherson and Jim Allen will be laid to rest with so many others who fought and died in the Battle of Loos in 1915. The work of the war detectives doesn't end with the naming of the soldiers. Today, they meet the families face to face for the first time and stand with them as their ancestors are honoured.
Good morning, everyone. They were once lost, but now they are found. We were blind, now we can see.
Gordon's home. We know where he is. It's a dream come true, I guess. I'm just really, really emotional, but in a good way, positive way.
I feel a deep, deep privilege, and am deeply moved by this young guy's life, so distant and far, and yet now so alive today through us honouring, giving him the burial that he's lucky enough to have. It's not everyone that's been named and discovered. It's just extraordinary.
As soon as those bagpipes play, it's just hard not to cry. And seeing them being buried today, surrounded by family as well, it's, you know, it's hard not to get emotional.
Back to work Monday, trying to find more?
Yeah, always. That's our job, and you know, as many as we can identify, we will do it. You know, as the saying goes, we will remember them, and that is what we do.
In the past 10 years, the Commonwealth War Graves Commission and the War Detectives have recovered and buried more than 300 soldiers. They've managed to identify 60 of them. There are still around 100,000 missing still to be found. Some never will be. But the War Detectives say their work will never stop.
What are you sounding now? Is it the call I'm seeking? You'll know the call, said the trumpet at all, when my trumpet goes a